Coming up on Evolve the Earth. On this two-part episode, we sit down with Professor Kurt Shadbolt and talk about what the automotive world is up to, plus what the future holds for electric vehicles. All that and more coming up on Evolve the Earth. Welcome to another episode of Evolve the Earth Talk Show podcast. And today we have our special guest, Kurt Shadbolt. How are we doing today, sir?
I'm real good. How are you today?
I'm doing great. So how did you get into automotive?
Yeah, so I'm one of 4 full-time faculty, or actually 3 full-time faculty in automotive.
Okay.
For me, cars were a hobby. I started out as a kid as a gearhead.
Okay.
And it just kind of grew from there. I looked at it as a profession. Went off to tech school after doing high school automotive and things like that. Came out of tech school, went into the dealerships and service environment. And in 2000, went into teaching. So I've been teaching for the last 24 years.
How has automotive technology evolved during your career, and what are the latest trends?
A lot of changes.
Okay.
And the automotive industry was very similar and common clear into the early 80s. And then once we started getting into the mid 80s, we started seeing more and more technology come in. That was our first batch of computer controlled vehicles coming in, computer controlled systems coming in. And since then, it's consistently ramped up. By the time we got into the early mid 2000s, we're now a rolling network. So no different than a building network, multiple networks, dozens to as many as 100 plus different computers in the vehicle. And then in that same period of time in the late 90s, early 2000s, you started seeing electrification come in with hybrids and EVs and the directions that those are going. And now with the AI, with the advanced driver assistance systems, it's changing rapidly, more so than it ever has in the past.
Wow, that is very interesting. How do different types of vehicles vary in their contributions to greenhouse gas emissions?
It really depends on a lot of different things. So if we just take the car, without an engine or fuel tank or electric powertrain, all of that is kind of the same regardless if it's an EV or a regular car. So we still have mining, we have oil that's pumped, we have emissions that are created in the plants that make the parts that assemble it and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then from the finished product side, if it's a gasoline car, it has a continuing amount of emissions because burning fuel. With the electric vehicle, depending on how that electricity is generated, is also creating emissions.
Wow.
If you're in the East Coast and they're using a coal plant, your electricity isn't as clean as it might be in, say, Washington, that's heavy hydroelectric.
Okay.
California is very heavy in the renewables. So most of our electricity is from hydroelectric, it's from solar, it's from wind, it's from geothermal, with a percentage that continues to decrease being natural gas. Anytime we burn something, we release CO2, and that's the emission impact. Just with gas cars and diesels, we burn more of it.
Yeah, that is definitely true. Oh man. Can you explain the environmental impact of manufacturing and disposing of vehicles in the context of climate change?
So for probably the last 20 plus years, every manufacturer has really moved aggressively on the recyclability of their vehicle. And a lot of that's federally mandated. And most cars today, you're in that 95 to 100% recyclable. So that car can be taken apart, stripped down to bare components. Metals could be recycled. Glass can be recycled. Even with the EVs now, electric batteries, oftentimes they're not recycled in the sense of shredded and rebuilt. They're repurposed. So they'll take that battery and put it in a battery storage station.
Oh, interesting.
So it might not be great for mileage in a car anymore, but for a standalone backup for an office or a building or a cabin in the woods, that battery lives a second life with reuse versus recycle.
So they multi-purpose it after. Oh, okay, that's great. What advancements in vehicle technology are helping reduce the carbon footprint of transportation?
A lot of it has come down to years of stuff. As emission controls have improved in vehicles, so early on they were kind of a negative, they hurt performance, but now the systems have gotten to the advancements that you're not going to notice the difference because it has it, which is a good thing. As we've improved emissions, fuel economy has gotten better, the inclusion of electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles and things like that. So all of those technologies are helping reduce it, but also as we start to bring in the driver assistance systems, so the automatic cruise controls and stuff, whereas a lot of people drive the gas pedal on off like a light switch or a brake pedal on off, whereas when they're on a cruise control, the vehicle kind of does that for them, but regular cruise won't bring the car to a stop. As we get into these new versions of adaptive cruise controls, that car can go through stop and go traffic and you never touch the gas, you never touch the brake. So it drives a more consistent way.
Right.
That consistency is going to improve mileage and reduce emissions.
That makes sense. How effective are current policies and regulations in curbing emissions from the automotive industry?
If you look back in time, so I taught smog classes for the state for a while. I've got the license to do that and stuff. And they'll show videos from the 50s and 60s,
right,
especially from LA, where it was just a brown cloud.
Brown cloud.
It was, I mean, they literally had a major health crisis from it.
Oh, wow.
So that's where California Air Resource Board and the state and the EPA started really working aggressively to improve vehicle emissions, reduce that stuff. Yeah, they were going after corporations too, but cars were a big chunk.
Right.
So as they've done that over time, we've seen them change a lot. 20 some odd years ago when I was driving to San Jose, you couldn't see the city skyline. There was a brown cloud. You drive to San Jose today, fairly blue sky most of the time. So we even see it noticeably in the last 20 years. Cars today, the emissions coming out of them are percentages of what they were even in the 80s, more or less in the 60s and 70s. It's been a massive difference.
It's been a long time since we were cranking those engines.
Long time.
What role can alternative fuels such as hydrogen and biofuels play in reducing the environmental impacts of vehicles?
So one of the big things that you get, so if we talk a regular diesel engine or we talk a gasoline engine, we're using oil. The downside to any emission is the carbon release. So if it's in a tree, if it's in a puddle of oil, it's safe there, it's locked in place. The minute we combust it, then we release it, that's when it gets into the atmosphere, that's when we have the impacts. So if we can burn less fuel, then we improve it. So something like hydrogen. Hydrogen doesn't have those carbon molecules to release. The downside to hydrogen though is it takes a lot of energy to free it. So I don't go mine hydrogen, I don't pump hydrogen, I release hydrogen.
Gotcha.
And it takes a lot of energy to release it to then be able to use it as a combustible fuel.
Right.
So that's kind of the negative for hydrogen. It costs a lot to get it. The positive of it is there's zero emissions coming out of the tailpipe from it. Biodiesels and stuff like that, a lot of those, it depends on how they're coming up with them. So True Biodiesels, there's a company over on the peninsula who literally, they use algae. So they take food waste, grass waste, every kind of waste you can think of. They throw it in a big old pot, they let it simmer and cook, and the algae eats it. And as the algae eats it, it digests it, and the byproduct of that digestion is an oily-like substance. They take that oily-type substance and they make a biofuel out of it.
Wow.
Military's been buying just about every drop they can get of that stuff for quite a while. Pure biofuels can be very, very clean. A lot of the bios tend to be a mix of something. So some of the biodiesels, you'll hear the veggie diesels and stuff like that, where it's old French fry oil. And they mix some chemicals in for stability and stuff to burn in the vehicle.
Are there specific regions and countries implementing successful strategies to reduce the carbon footprint to their transportation systems?
It's funny, for a long time, California especially was really kind of the leader in vehicle emission reductions.
We're not no more.
At this point, really, it's more Europe. Europe has taken a much more aggressive stance in vehicle emissions, to where different vehicles, if you look at the TV ad on the bottom, the fine print of a TV ad on a car commercial in the US, it talks about miles per gallon. In Europe, it talks about CO2 per kilometer. So the physical emissions from that vehicle over a distance. And they apply taxes to that vehicle accordingly. So if you've got a dirtier car, you pay more in taxes. If you have a cleaner car, you pay less in taxes. But also you've got areas like in London who have congestion fees. So you want to drive in downtown London, you pay a fee just to get in. But if your car is a diesel or a gas car, that fee is higher than it is if it's an electric car.
That makes sense.
So different incentives and stuff. They're a little more ahead. They've been a little more aggressive on electrification of vehicles. But even historically, their mass transportation is better. So for us here in the Bay Area, we have buses and BART and things like that. But if you live in Dublin, Pleasanton, Tracy, you can get from there to here, but then it might take you 2 more hours on a bus to get to Chabot. It's not practical. Whereas in a lot of other countries, the infrastructure was built to be just a better fit. You can take a train from the outsides inside, and then you take the local trolleys and trains inside, and maybe you're walking a quarter of a mile or whatever to your office from the local train station. We're not like that. San Francisco's closer than most, but that's the big difference. They've taken it differently, and a lot of that's historical.
Can you discuss the concept of sustainable urban mobility and its relation to mitigating climate change?
A lot of the discussion takes place on, let's say, package delivery.
Okay.
So you've got a company wherever,
right?
They're in Texas. The company's building that box of whatever it is you're buying. How does it get from Texas to, say, Hayward? Well, in many cases, it's going by truck. So we've got the fuel costs and things associated with that truck to come all the way in.
Right.
But that truck's too big to deliver to a small business downtown. So it's probably going to go to a transfer station, who's then going to take it onto a smaller truck, and so on and so on. If you're in downtown urban cities, well, that truck might even be too big, and it's a smaller truck or a motorcycle or whatever. That same mindset is even for moving people, is how do we get people from a faraway place at a lower cost, a lower emissions impact, to where they need to be for a workplace in whatever the best manner is. And so we start seeing things in navigation systems, Google Maps. You got to be careful if you map directions in Google Maps. Did you select by driving, by airplane, by boat, by car, or walking and bicycle? And you realize your 3-mile trip is now 6 hours because it's got you walking instead of driving.
Yeah, sure.
So that is a big part. And anytime that we can burn less, we pollute less.
Let's practice that. Attention drivers. What is the best method to adjust your side mirrors on your vehicle? Well, before we get into that, we asked some college students about where they kept their side mirrors at.
Well, it's an interesting question. And, talking about girls, as girls, let's just picture that we are in a movie scene, and what we care about, it's let's imagine that paparazzi running to catch our stunning reflections in those side mirrors, and voila, you're just ready, to hit the road in a style.
Shoo, I don't even use mine. They're in a locked safe and they're gonna stay there forever. I mean, everything's crazy these days. People are breaking into cars. If someone steals my mirrors, it's over for me.
Side mirror? I don't have side mirrors because someone took them when my car grew legs.
That's a rather personal question. It's 10 and 11, right? No, 10 and 2.
Those were some awesome answers there. Let's get into our driver hack now. First, make sure your seat is adjusted to your driving preferences. We will check our driver's door side mirror first. To properly adjust, align the front door handle in the lower right corner of the driver's side mirror. Repeat this process on the passenger door side. Adjusting your front passenger door handle to the lower left corner of the passenger's side mirror. This should maximize your vision with your side mirrors.
Thank you so much for telling me this. I'll definitely tell my other girls.
Oh, I see. So they're supposed to be on the car all the time.
Oh, okay, I have to think about that one. Thank you. It's all good.
All right.
I haven't driven in a long time.
Remember to drive safely, and please be courteous. This is our segment, The Professional Driver. I am Alan Sampson reporting for Evolve the Earth. What are the potential challenges and opportunities associated with the future of autonomous and connected vehicles in the context of climate change?
Believe it or not, the advanced driver systems, so those autonomous type systems, we've had them for over 20 years.
Wow.
In various levels, we've had them for over 20 years. What it starts to allow us to do is have greater levels of efficiency. That vehicle may plot a better route than I might normally take because of getting live information. We might hear that information on the radio if we're listening to the radio, but that live navigation could literally alter the route.
Right.
Whereas currently you say no or yes or I'm ignoring that, it would just do it. So that could help reduce some things. Flow of traffic is another one where we've all gone through that stop and go on the freeway, and by the time you get where it speeds up, there's nothing there. There's no accident. It's that ripple effect from an hour ago. The autonomous vehicles have the capability to balance that better. To where instead of come and stop and go, they could all slow the flow of traffic down equally. Be more patient. Those kinds of things. And also now as you start to increase the vehicle communication level, the car can talk to the infrastructure. So it could talk to the street lights, it could talk to the bus station and say, hey, I'm in slow traffic or there's an accident, which helps get the city services in those places faster to fix the things that would speed up the traffic. If I speed up the traffic, I reduce the emissions.
Definitely. That does help out. That's awesome. Can you discuss the role of electric and hybrid vehicles in the future of the automotive industry?
So what really brought electric vehicles and hybrids and alternative fuels into play was California looked at emissions. The reason California addresses emissions very aggressively is our climate. We have marginal winds depending on where you're at. We have hot temperatures. So Central Valley, not a lot of wind, hot temperatures. The smogs, we'll call it that, they tend to settle. Think of it as like fog in a sense. And those chemicals and that stuff will settle down. So what the state has had to do to meet federal requirements for clean air and water and such, they've had to do things that would reduce those emissions. So some of that they were able to do over many years on the gasoline cars, and then they started on diesel, but it wasn't enough. We would still have a lot of those spare the air days where we were too much. And the state gets penalized. We have too many spare the air days, we get in trouble with the EPA. California Air Resource Board has been given a lot of leeway for regulating in California to be even more aggressive than the EPA is. What they started to look at in the 90s, they started building out this pathway for a car company to still sell cars in California. They had to have a certain percentage of what they called a zero emission vehicle, or a ZEV. And that was where you started seeing the electric cars, the hydrogen. And at those times, the technology wasn't quite there yet. We started seeing pathways to stepping stones. So alternative fuels, we started seeing compressed natural gas, propane vehicles. Those were the most prominent ones that we saw, but then we started seeing hybrid vehicles. And the whole idea of the hybrid vehicle is that electric motor helps assist the gasoline motor. So if the gasoline motor doesn't have to work as hard or as at all, that's less emissions. And then the next steps of that would be electric or fuel cell. So with the fuel cell, they're using hydrogen. So we saw goods and bads of the hydrogen. Back when we had Governor Schwarzenegger, there was a big push in California, the hydrogen highway. And we still don't have that. Again, because to create hydrogen takes a lot of energy, or to release hydrogen takes a lot of energy.
And money?
And money. So those next steps, as battery technologies improve, we kind of started saying, okay, hydrogen's great, but for the mass might not be there yet. And it might not be there for a while, if ever. For fleets and stuff, though, it could be cost effective. As battery technology improved, that's where EV started to leverage in heavier. Diesel started to have some pretty good ground for a bit. Volkswagen had some troubles with diesel, and that kind of put an end to the diesel world a little bit. But now with the battery technologies and what's happening with electrification, that's how we're going to meet those numbers. And with California, it's 2035.
The year
2035, they're going to stop selling gasoline or combustion engines.
I mean, we'll still be able to drive them, we're just not selling them.
They're just not going to sell new. Heavy duty trucks and the large like tractor trailers and stuff, they have, I think, till 2040. But they're already making movements on that. So Tesla with Pepsi and Frito-Lay, you see their Tesla semis running around. There's a lot more delivery and stuff because there's some cost effectiveness that companies are finding. You're seeing city fleets, transportation fleets, so your AC Transit, school buses, things like that, are moving towards electrification. It's kind of a snowball. It's like anything else. You reach a tipping point, and to where it's kind of slow, and you hit that tipping point, and then it rapidly speeds up. You have that change between a horse and a buggy and a car. And then once it does, the other one goes away. We're getting really close with that on the EVs. And right now, the struggle for car manufacturers is they tend to be producing that $100,000 car because they can recover costs faster.
That makes sense.
But they have to survive doing that long enough to build the $30,000 car. And people lose track. Even a cheap gas car now is $30,000+.
Can you share any insights into the impact of emerging technologies like autonomous driving and automotive education?
So when we talked about the autonomous a little bit, it becomes an efficiencies thing. From that aspect, from an emissions standpoint, the vehicle can be smoother on its throttle application and deceleration than the human. Better chance that it's going to stay around the speed limit, which helps with traffic flows, but also reduces emissions. Many of the service industries, we went away from it. So when I was in school a million years ago, you had shop classes. You had metal shop and wood shops and all these different shop classes. And people grew up learning mechanical things and mechanical aptitudes. And then when education went all in on transfer, it was all about a college degree. The K through 12s kind of moved away from the trade-based things and went all into transfer. transfer. And what we've struggled with is, where are a lot of the jobs at?
Yeah.
Do I need a 4-year degree for most jobs? Not anymore.
Right. Nope.
But do I have a skill set? That makes me more employable.
Yeah.
And skill sets go with you. They're not with
sure.
the company. So if I'm in a company and I'm putting flap A into slot B, I've got a job as long as they're doing that.
Yeah.
If they stop doing that, I don't have a job.
Yeah.
Whereas if I learn a skill, I can go anywhere in the world and work on cars.
Yeah.
And when times are good, I work on new stuff. When times are bad, I work on old stuff. But it's not just cars.
Right.
So that same basic function and aptitude that I have working on a car, I can apply that to other things. So I can go work on a forklift, standalone generators. Every company, or most buildings now have a big generator outside for electrical backup. Same functionalities as a car.
Yeah.
Especially as we get into EVs. Electric car, boat, truck, airplane, motorcycle, they all work the same. Once you understand the fundamentals, you learn how to use tools, you learn to have a mechanical aptitude, you can apply it in a lot of different ways. And even if somebody doesn't want to work on a car, if they own one. I use the example a lot of when you go to the doctor and they tell you, you're sick or whatever, and they say blah, 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 and you just go, yes. Okay, here's the prescription, go do it. They run into that same thing when they go to get their car fixed. The person tells them blah, 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 and you just go, okay, and you pay the bill. Whereas if you have a little bit of knowledge and you learn the language and you get some experience from an intro class, that you can now have a conversation and have an idea what they're talking about, but more importantly, you can ask good questions. And they say, oh, you need brake rotors.
That makes sense. Just kind of having the basics understanding of what it is. But as it evolves, it changes too.
And we get people that come in and they have no purpose or no desire originally to become technicians. And then they get in the program and they start learning, I kind of like this. And then they find out there's other ways to apply it. I can have an impactful career with this. Or at the very least, I can have a job that pays really well while I go to school.
How do electric vehicles contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions compared to traditional vehicles? I think you touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, we touched on that a little bit earlier. If I'm not burning things.
Right.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So if I burn oil, I release the CO2, but I also release other chemicals as part of the combustion process.
Right.
None of which are all that great. So anytime I can not burn something, I'm improving things. So, and like we mentioned with the EVs, EVs not burning anything to provide transportation, but what is creating the electricity? That is the big question mark. And in some parts of the country, in some parts of the world, if they're a coal-based electricity plant, that's going to be dirty electricity. Maybe not as dirty as oil, but pretty dang close. But the one it's from a solar panel or wind or a hydroelectric, that's really clean. And in all honesty, other than a solar panel, we make electricity the same way. We create steam with some sort of a fuel. Whether it's hot water or wind or nuclear or whatever, we create hot water. That steam moves a propeller. That propeller runs a generator that creates electricity. And that's how we make it. And if it's coal, we're burning it to burn water to make the steam.
And that's where we'll park it for today. On the next episode, we drive more into our vehicles' advancements and technologies in Automotive World Part 2. You won't want to miss the next leg of the journey. You are tuned in to Evolve the Earth Talk Show podcast. Like, follow, and subscribe on all platforms at ETE Talk Show. Leave a comment about any subjects you would like us to discuss or questions that we could answer during our show. Thank you, world. Your time is highly appreciated. I am your host, Alan Sampson. See you all on the next show.